He is also held largely responsible for the commencement of Zimbabwe's debt relief program and the normalization of its relations with international financial institutes such as the IMF and the African Development Bank. In his political career, Honorable BITI was the lead negotiator and draftsman for an interim draft constitution, the Kariba Draft Constitution 2013. In the government of national unity, he also worked on various statutes such as the Electoral Act, National Security Act, and the Zimbabwe's new constitution approved in the referendum of 2013. He obtained his Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Zimbabwe in 1988 and his Bachelor of Law honors degree from the University of Zimbabwe in 1989. He is the author of several articles on the Zimbabwean economy, Africa, and international tax matters. Honorable TENDAI BITI, without saying a lot, I hand over the podium to you.
Well, thank you, Father, and good evening to all the listeners. It's a privilege to be on this platform. I've been asked to speak on the issue of SADC and peace. And I want to begin by saying that we must agree on the definition of peace, because peace doesn't necessarily mean the absence of war. There's conflict, there's domestic conflict in most of the Southern African countries that are covered by the SADC Treaty and the SADC Charter. There's a conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There's a conflict in Angola. There's a conflict in Zimbabwe. There's a conflict in Mozambique. And in Mozambique, just like in the DRC, there are two conflicts: a physical a conflict and an economic conflict, a struggle for justification, a struggle for legitimacy, a struggle around the social contract. There's no war in South Africa, but the absence of a physical war doesn't mean that there's peace in South Africa. There's conflict in the Republic of South Africa. The same applies to Zambia until recently. Until August of 2021, there clearly was a massive conflict in South Africa, sorry, in Zambia. The same applies to Malawi. So I want to begin by saying that I'll deal with the subject first in relation to our ordinary understanding of the term peace, which means the absence of physical war. Now, the starting point is that SADC itself, and you need to go to the SADC Charter, SADC itself was never created for physical conflict, was never created on a platform for confronting a physical conflict. And so you have a limitation, a conceptual limitation. The conceptual limitation arising out of the birth of SADC. As all of you know, SADC, as we know it, was only created in 1992, on the 19th of August, 1992 to be exact, when 10 heads of states met in Windhoek, Namibia, and agreed to sign the charter establishing SADC on the 19th of August, 1992. SADC was a successor to the SADCCC, SADC, but with a double C's. SADC with double C's, yeah. So the original SADC, the SADCC, was formed in August of 1980. And its core business, it was a successor to the frontline movement that had been formed by independent Southern African countries led by Tanzania and Zanzibar, sorry, in Zambia, in or around 1972. So Zambia under President, the late and great Mwalimu Nyerere, so Tanzania under the late and great Mwalimu Nyerere, Zambia under the late and great Kenneth Kaunda, to a lesser extent, Malawi under Hastings Kamuzu Banda, supported the creation of the frontline states. And the core business of the frontline states was to support the decolonization process. The concept of the frontline states was to support the struggle for one man, one vote, and I mean it in the literal sense, that was being played out in countries such as Angola and Mozambique against the Portuguese colonial domination, against the settlers in southern Rhodesia or Rhodesia, against the apartheid states in South Africa, against this apartheid state in Southwest Africa, which we now call as Namibia. So the frontline states gave way to SADC in 1980. And the core business, again, of the SADC remained decolonization, particularly because two important countries had not been decolonized in 1980. And those countries were the Republic of South Africa, which achieved democratic rule in 1992 or 1994, and Namibia, which achieved democratic rule in 1991. Now, when you come to 1992, and I urge colleagues to read the guidelines, these leaders signed a very important document called the guidelines to the charter. And it's a very important document. They call it the declaration. So the declaration explained why they were forming SADC, the SADC, why they were making an important step from SADCC to SADC with a single C. And if you read the declaration, you will see that the key issue was economic integration. The key issue was economic development. So the transition from SADC with a double C to SADC with a single C to a community was actually motivated by the desire to achieve economic integration. Hence the need to create a community along the same lines as the European Union and the European community. So the declaration is very clear. The declaration that they signed is very clear. Now, if you look to and I'm going to read to you the objectives of SADC, and you will see how limited they are. They are spelled out in Article 4 of the Charter. And I'm going to read them to you, if you just pay to me. So the objectives which are set out in Article 5 are the following. Number 1, to achieve development and economic growth, alleviate poverty, enhance the standard and quality of life of the people of Southern Africa, and support the socially disadvantaged through regional integration. What I've said before, that the intention and the motive was regional integration. B, evolve common political values, systems, and institutions. C, promote and defend peace and security. D, promote self-sustaining development on the basis of collective self-reliance. E, achieve complementarity between national and regional strategies. F, promote and maximize productive employment and utilization of resources. G, achieve sustainable utilization of natural resources. And H, lastly, strengthen and consolidate the long-standing historical and social and cultural affinities and links among the people of the region. Now, there are certain things that you will find that are missing there in these objectives. You will not find the word democracy. So there's no intention of dealing with the democracy, i.e., the aspirations of their people towards democratic ideals. Number two, you will not find the word good governance there. You will not find the word constitutionalism and the rule of law there. You will not find the words such as accountability, such as power transfer, such as separation of powers. These norms are very important because you will find them in any modern democratic charter right now. I'm a constitutional lawyer. You can't write the constitution of anything. And I was heavily involved in the crafting of the Zimbabwean constitution. You can't write a document these days without reference to the rule of law, without reference to constitutionalism, without reference to to democracy, to accountability, to legality, to legitimacy, to the social contract. So that is critical because the absence of these terms, the absence of these value systems underlying one of the structural weaknesses which we have in present day SADC. Now, even though Article 5.3 speaks about the defense of peace and national security, you don't find any further reference in the founding document. You don't find any further reference. So, in other words, a lip service was paid to the concept of peace and security. If there had been sufficient attention paid to peace and security, then this document would have dealt with number one, what exactly do they mean by promoting security and stability? And by that time in 1992, they had massive experiences of regional and international conflict. They knew about Palestine. They knew about the conflict between Palestine and Israel. And it's not an accident that I'm referring to that because you have spent the whole day discussing that. They knew about the conflicts in West Africa. They knew about coups and countless coups on the African continent. They knew about massive civil wars on the African continent, including the perennial wars in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the perennial unresolved issues in the Horn of Africa, in Eritrea, in Somalia, in Somaliland, in Djibouti. They knew about those things. Yet the document is naked. It is conspicuous by its lack of reference to the establishment of a mechanism dealing with the defense and security. That would come literally 10 years later when they established the organ Troika, the organ on security and defense. We call it the organ, Troika. It played a key role on the Zimbabwean crisis from 2007 until the signing of the global political agreement on the 15th of September 2008. So quite clearly, even though the Charter recognized the imperative of peace and security, the Charter itself, apart from a cursory reference in the objectives in Article 5.3, there was no mechanism, there was no infrastructure that was put in the Charter to deal with peace and security. So the Charter, for instance, would not answer how SADC would respond if there's an external threat. to regional peace and stability. How would SADC respond? For instance, we have a situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now, where where there's a conflict between Rwanda and the DRC on the eastern side of the DRC. So if Rwanda were to invade a member state such as the DRC, how would SADC respond? The charter did not have an answer in 1992. It doesn't have an answer even up to now. It doesn't have an answer of the situation, the security situation in Cabo Delgado, in northeastern part of Mozambique. There's no response to that. So that was the first weakness of SADC, and it is still a current weakness. It doesn't have a response mechanism. It doesn't have a philosophy geared towards peace, towards the security. The second weakness, in my view, is that for all intents and purposes, SADC has remained a boys' club of liberation movements, many of whom who are very exhausted, many of whom are caught up within their own contradictions. The dominance of liberation movements in SADC with a common interest, in particular political parties such as liberation movements such as the African National Congress, the ANC, ZANU, Frelimo in Mozambique, and the MPLA in Angola. And these liberation movements, particularly ZANU, Frelimo, and the MPLA, went through a very long liberation struggle. And a long liberation struggle creates contradictions that the citizens of Mozambique are paying a price for up until this very day, that the citizens of Zimbabwe are paying a price up until this day, that the citizens of Angola have been paying a price for a very long time. And any Zimbabwean will tell you that Zimbabweans are still fighting a war that finished 43 years ago in 1979. The point of reference, the point of legitimacy is, did you fight in the war of liberation? The point of reference, the point of legitimacy is that we liberated you, and therefore you must be subordinate to us. And three contradictions are created. Number one, there's a culture of impunity. We can get away with anything because we liberated you. So you see this overwhelming culture of impunity. We can get away with anything. The twin evil to the culture of impunity is the culture of entitlement. So we are entitled to govern you. We are entitled to stands. We are entitled to farms. During the time of the indigenization program, we are entitled to shares in companies because we liberated you. And any Zimbabwean knows what I'm talking about. Any Mozambican knows what I'm talking about. Any Angolan knows what I'm talking about. And to a very large extent, every South African knows what I'm talking about. So there's a culture of entitlement, there's a culture of impunity. The third disease is the scorched earth mentality, the winner take all mentality. If I can't have it, no one else can have it. In the Solomonic parable, and here I'm straying into areas that you know better than me, they are like the woman who says, let's cut the baby in half. So if I can't have it, no one else will have it. This predatory mindset, you have seen it in Mozambique, you have seen it in Zimbabwe, you are seeing it in South Africa, you are seeing it in Angola. Although, to be fair to the new government, to be fair to the new president, they are doing a lot to try and reverse that. You notice that I've left out Chama Pinduzi, because Chama Pinduzi in Tanzania has gone through some internal changes which have moderated the fangs of the liberation movement. The aberration being the brief period of John Pombe Magufuli, may his soul rest in peace. And Chama Pinduzi managed to accept the concept of internal change, which is why you have seen 4 or 5 presidents since the retirement of the late and great Mwalimu Nyerere. You saw Hassan Mwinyi, you saw William Benjamin Mkapa, may his soul rest in peace. You saw my good friend, President Jijaya Kikwete, of course, the aberration, John Pombe Magufuli, and of course now the lady president, who is doing very well from the point of view of trying to undo the work, this disastrous work of John Pombe Magufuli. It's a very different environment right now in Tanzania. It's a Tanzania that is more consistent with what we know of Tanzania, a very soft, a very tolerant society, unlike Zimbabwe, unlike Mozambique, and so forth. So that is changing, and so Chama Pinduzi is different. And the lesson from these liberation movements is that if they don't reform, they disappear, they die a natural death. And we've seen liberation movements dying a natural death. We saw the death of Khan in Kenya. We saw the death of UNIP in Zambia. In Zambia, UNIP died with President Kenneth Kaunda when he retired and lost the election in 1991 to MMD. So we have a real danger. The ANC, ZANU-PF, Frelimo in Mozambique actually face a real danger of total extermination and because of the weight of contradictions, the limitations of liberation movements, as Frantz Fanon argues in The Wretched of the Earth, chapter 4, the pitfalls of national consciousness, is that they were designed for one purpose, the one man, one vote fight. They are not geared to deal with the challenges of a modern state, the challenges of economic liberation, economic inclusion, and so forth. Hence these contradictions. The ANC is facing exactly the same challenges in South Africa, which is why its share of the vote has dramatically decreased from 1994 to now. And equally, the share of South Africans voting is now less than 50% because of the contradictions of the liberation movement. The third limitations to peace is that all these countries are caught with internal contradictions which take away and consume their attention. So internationalism, regional peace become academic because each one of them is fighting for internal survival. So if you take South Africa, President Ramaphosa right now is busy, particularly with this farm gate. He's busy with internal issues. If you take Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF is busy with internal issues. The same applies to some extent to Botswana. There are now internal contradictions. Look at the way they are harassing President Ian Khama and so forth. So internal contradictions and internal developments, internal fights, make the agenda of peace and stability become very secondary. So there's no longer any intervention in any other country. During the period of President Mbeki, we saw a very active South Africa. South Africa was active in Zimbabwe, and South Africa presided over as a mediator in the Zimbabwean crisis, leading to the execution of the global political agreement on the 15th of September, 2008, as I have said. South Africa was very active in the Democratic Republic of Congo. South Africa was very active in South Sudan. So South Africa had a very strong presence on the sub-Saharan scene, not just the South African scene, but on the sub-Saharan scene. South Africa was also very active in other international crises, in other international situations, but not anymore. Not anymore, because it's caught up in internal contradictions. And there are three tests that SADC has failed, that the agenda for peace and security has failed, which I want to give. The first one, and the most recent, is the crisis in the northeastern of Mozambique, the crisis in Cabo Delgado. We all know what is happening there. I can write a book about the crisis there. The normative crisis, and this you'll find in any textbook, you'll find in any article, is that there are jihadists there, Muslim jihadists there, who are causing an insurrection, and thousands of people have been internally displaced, particularly since 2017. But when you dig deeper, the crisis is created from domestic contradictions, the exclusion of local actors from huge boundary. Remember, it's a very wealthy region. So the locals feel very excluded because all the bounty, all the contracts go to the Makonde people, the old Frelimo veterans who have huge contracts, who are operating in that region. I say Makonde because most of them come from the Makonde tribe, which is also the tribe of President Nyusi. So there's exclusion, economic exclusion. You find economic exclusion in Zimbabwe. You find economic exclusion in South Africa. You find economic exclusion in the DRC. So yes, we are now talking about Al-Shabaab and jihadists, but this is primarily a local crisis of misgovernance, of misallocation of resources, of uneven and unequal development. But that's a story for another day. My story right now is the failure of SADC to respond. SADC failed to send a mission. And it had to wait for President Paul Kagame in Rwanda to actually come and deal with the insurgency there. There's relative peace and stability right now in Cabo Delgado, not because of SADC, but because of the intervention of Rwanda. Where was SADC? SADC was not there. Why was it not there? It's because of the limitations that I've explained, the three limitations that I've explained. Number one, its charter was never designed to deal with conflict, armed conflict. Number two, it's an old boys club and it won't interfere unless there are interests and the personal interests of leaders for that matter. And I will demonstrate what I mean by that. Thirdly, the internal contradictions. The country that should have led the intervention was South Africa because it is the biggest economy, $500 GDP. It's the biggest $1 billion GDP. It should have led the intervention, but it's caught up with its own contradictions. Now I want to, so that's failure number one. Failure number two is the Zimbabwean military coup of November 2017. Now, SADC turned a blind eye to that coup. Turned a blind eye to that coup. I don't know the reason, but it could have been that many of them felt that President Mugabe had outlived his usefulness. But what was at stake in Zimbabwe was not President Mugabe. What was at stake in Zimbabwe was was an undemocratic assault on a democratic democratically, I say this in inverted commas, democratically elected sovereign government. One of the core reasons for the existence of SADC, the protection of the sovereign rights of these states, not just the SADC Charter, the Article 2.2 of the UN Charter, sovereignty. Article 2 of the UN Charter. The African Charter as well protects the independence and integrity of African states, and there is no bigger invasion on sovereignty than a military coup, and of course a foreign coup. SADC did not respond. SADC did not respond. SADC failed to meet the test. Another failure, Swaziland. There was an insurrection in Swaziland. Workers rose against the king. The king fled. But Swaziland was hardly put on the agenda of SADC. And so you have a situation right now where there is a massive limbo in Swaziland, where there's a massive democratic deficit in Swaziland, where for all intents and purposes, Swaziland has become a failed state. Swaziland has become a dysfunctional state because the king has lost his de facto and de jure authority to govern. Where is SADC? SADC has turned a blind eye. Number 4. So I've spoken of Mozambique, I've spoken of Zimbabwe, I've spoken of Swaziland. Number 4 is a subject that I've already referred to, which is the DRC. The DRC is a crisis that has re-emerged, which is the crisis in Goma, which is the crisis in Gisenyi, which is the crisis in the eastern part of the DRC. So as I'm talking to you right now, there's a war in the eastern part of the DRC between Rwanda and the DRC. And SADC has done nothing. SADC will do nothing. I don't think personally that the DRC has got the capacity to fend off or to deal with the Rwanda. I think Rwanda is a military machine. Rwanda is a military machine, particularly if history repeats itself. And President Yoweri Museveni gets involved on the side of Rwanda. So you now have a replay of 1998, 1999, 2000, when we had our only regional war in the Congo Basin, when Zimbabwe and Angola intervened on the part of Joseph Kabila to fend off Rwanda and Uganda. But we know why Zimbabwe intervened in 2000. We know why Zimbabwe intervened in 1998 and 1999 in a very expensive war that was costing the Zimbabwean people US $1 million a day. We know why. You need to read the 1992 UN report on the DRC war, which confirms and talks about the loot that was given, that was paid out, that was extracted by certain individuals in Zimbabwe, including the current head of state in Zimbabwe. The massive looting that took place of cobalt, of diamonds, and so forth. So Zimbabwe intervened in order to secure private pockets. SADC did not intervene. SADC did not intervene in the DRC in 1999 and so forth. In fact, the bulk of SADC was actually against intervention, but was opting for a peaceful solution. But let's compare now SADC with ECOWAS. Whenever ECOWAS has had similar type of problems, ECOWAS has intervened. ECOWAS has sent an army. ECOWAS sent an army in Liberia to deal with Charles Taylor. And if those of you who know history will know that President Obasanjo was at the forefront of pushing ECOWAS to deal with Charles Taylor. In fact, Charles Taylor was eventually apprehended hiding on the border between Cameroon and Nigeria. They didn't pussyfoot. ECOWAS intervened when Yahya Jammeh refused to leave. Get away. ECOWAS told President Abdoulaye Wade that, my friend, you can't extend your term. We will send the army there. So the contradiction between ECOWAS, the distinction between ECOWAS and SADC has never been more stark. It's never been more stark. But to be fair, the limitations of SADC are reflected in the regional bodies, in the sub-Saharan body known as the African Union. There's a serious civil war in Ethiopia, and thousands of Tigrayans have been killed. I would argue there's a genocide there. Where's the African Union? The African Union failed to send or to respond to Burundi when the late president hung on to power undemocratically. They failed to deal with the permanent crisis in the Central African Republic. They failed to deal with insurgency in Mali. They failed to deal with endless coups in Mali. They failed to deal with endless crises and endless coups in Burkina Faso. So there's a mindset in SADC, and there's a mindset in the African Union that African problems should be outsourced to foreigners, not other Africans, to foreigners. That is why you find, as I'm talking to you right now, the biggest peace mission on the African continent consists of a UN peacekeeping mission in Mogadishu, Somalia. And before that, you had UN peacekeepers in Sierra Leone, UN peacekeepers in Darfur. So it's not good enough. It's not good enough. So I'll summarize, therefore, by saying, but I also want to be fair. I also want to be fair in saying that most of the countries in the region take Malawi, take Zambia, take Zimbabwe, take the DRC itself, take Namibia, take Lesotho, take Madagascar, take Mauritius, take the Seychelles, and these are take Tanzania. These are the members, these are all the members of SADC. With the exception of South Africa, there is none that is budget space. There is none that has got fiscal space to fund a war, to fund a peacekeeping mission, to fund military intervention, such as the one that was required in Mozambique, the one that is required in the DRC. None of them. There's absolutely no fiscal space. But I don't think that is an excuse. If Zimbabwe could afford $1 million a day in 1999, surely you can raise from the SADC countries outside South Africa, you can raise $4-5 million a day, and you can support a mission. So in conclusion, I want to say that we are only surviving because the threat of war generally internationally, in sub-Saharan Africa and across the globe has receded. The likelihood of member states fighting against each other has dramatically receded. And I think that is one of humanity's greatest achievements after the Second World War, after 1945, the dramatic reduction in interstate wars. That means that peace in that narrow definition is guaranteed. So the world has changed now. There is now domestic conflicts arising out of particularly resources, arising out of particularly the democratic deficit. 3, there is now non-state threats, particularly of jihadism and terrorism. So non-state actors are now causing disturbances and wars. We've seen this with the Boko Haram in Nigeria. We've seen this with Al-Shabaab in the Horn of Africa. Ironically, the insurgents in Mozambique are also called Al-Shabaab, but not with two A's. So the Muslim extremists in Mozambique, to some extent, we have seen this in parts of Eastern Africa. You remember the bombs in Kenya and so forth. Then, of course, there is always the permanent threat of civil wars, actual civil war, and DRC is an unfortunate example of that. So the recession has helped African states. The recession has helped the SADC region. But by that, there's no capacity. There's no capacity to respond. And the limitations of SADC lie from its history, lie from its founding documents. It also lies in its leadership. We've paid a leadership prize on the Southern African, in the SADC region. They haven't had a leader equal to Obasanjo, with great respect. So leadership, we've paid a prize in leadership. Number 4, we've paid a prize because of SADC's lager mentality, its old boys club mentality, stemming from the over-dominance of toxic politics of tired and exhausted liberation movements. And here I'm not undermining the liberation struggle. I'm very grateful to the liberation struggle. But post-independence, it is my respectful submission that liberation movements should play no role. Post-independence, in case I'm misunderstood. Number 5 has been the limitations arising from internal contradictions that absorb the attention, the resources of SADC leaders. Put differently, the power retention agenda, the internal power retention agenda, each one of these leaders is concerned with regime survival. How do I win my re-election, my second term in the next Congress of my party? And after I've won at the Congress, how do I make sure that I win a second term for myself as a leader? President Nyusi would have answered that question. It's a question in Zimbabwe. It's a question in South Africa, and so forth. That also imposes its limitations. So there's relative peace and stability in the Southern African region only as a result of historical accident. The historical process being the rescission of inter-party conflict after the Second World War. So peace is there by default, not by active agency of the leaders. I'll stop here, Baba. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Advocate TENDAI BITI, for the wonderful presentation. I'll hand over the time to Tapua, who will be the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Gusha. Thank you very much, Honorable TENDAI BITI. Glad to see you. Thank you for.
Can I just answer? I'm doing that Zoom with Baba Gusha. Okay, bye. Domestic affairs.
Thank you very much. I
decided not to go home because my guests are kuna.
I see.
So I decided to do this at the office.
Thank you very much for the commitment and for the presentation. We really appreciate it. Right, friends, this is an opportunity for us now to interact with the Honorable TENDAI BITI. If we have any other questions or points of clarity, this is our opportunity to do that. So the platform is open for us to talk. If you have any questions, either raise your hand or just.
I can see also the moderator is there now.
I'm seeing connecting. If she's connected, then he can take over. Still, it's okay if he's connected already. But anyway, we can continue the question and answer segment.
There are quite a few. There are some hands there. Dr. Soda, Father Manzo, they're already there.
Yeah, missing. Yeah, Father Manzongo, you are the first on my left. Maybe if you may start. If you may go first.
Thank you very much, Moderator Baba Gusha, and thank you, Honorable BITI. It's good to hear from you this fine presentation. Muchitidzidzisa zvezvigananda zvatinazvo. I always like that word when you mention it. From Atsunzu Nyangatsikwe, and I was reading that book. Anyway, so I wanted to. I think about 2 or 3 questions and a comment. So from the presentation you've given us, as I was reading about the history of SADC, I have seen, yes, that there was a sense of comedy in how they do things. Like, to start with, when they formed the SADC with the double C, it was formed on the 1st of April, 1980, and I laughed about it when I was reading that. And then the organ on politics and defense and security was created in 1996, but had no legal framework until August of 2001. And as I was looking at it, I said, what regional body can do this? So those are my comments as I was reading about SADC. But now, Now my question is, you compared SADC and ECOWAS. Do they give us a sense of the differences in philosophy between Nyerere and Nkrumah? Because when you started comparing that, I thought of these leaders as well, and I see as if they are representing these blocks as well. So in the way that we operate, do we put out the differences, or are we in a way representative of the differences between Nyerere and Nkrumah? And then maybe the last question I can ask is, talking about SADC, what are your comments on what has recently happened, that PAP has chosen Chief Fortune Charumbira as the president, and maybe just comment about the struggle between the two blocks as well, concerning the presidency of that parliament. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, firstly, well, look, I'm glad you have noticed the point I'd also made, that you know, it took literally 10 years to actually constitute the SADC organ troika, from 1992 to 2001, which is sad, which is reflective of the fact that they never thought about war, they never thought about peace, they never thought about security. And I think part of the problem, and it illustrates my point. It illustrates my point that nationalism is great as a mobilizing instrument for the national question, for the struggle for independence, for the struggle of one man, one vote, for the struggle of decolonization. It's good. It whips up emotions. It whips up its emotions, and it employs crude tactics to whip up those emotions. But it doesn't have the craft competence of, it doesn't have statecraft. It doesn't have the ability to manage a modern state. It doesn't have the ability to transit Africa and poor African countries into modern, vibrant, middle-income states. And a comparison, my friends and I have published a book 2 years ago called The Asian Experience. And one of the things we do in that book is to compare the Asian path and the African path. How many of you know that at independence in 1958, Ghana, the Ghanaian economy was bigger than that of South Korea, was bigger than that of countries like Taiwan? How many of you know that Singapore only became an independent state in 1965? When Malaysia became independent in 1960, no one wanted it. They said that useless little island. But you can compare Singapore per capita has got GDP, which is per capita, which is bigger than the United States of America. Bigger than the United States of America, but it's just a little island. You can drive the entire circumference of Singapore in 4 or 5 hours, and so forth. What was critical? Leadership. Because Nkrumah is not Lee Kuan Yew. Alpha Conde is not Lee Kuan Yew. Robert Mugabe is not Lee Kuan Yew. Mzee Kenyatta is not Lee Kuan Yew. Odimba is not Lee Kuan Yew. That is the problem, a leadership issue. So South Korea, a country which doesn't have steel, is one of the world's greatest engineering companies with huge giants like Hyundai and Samsung. But Ghana, the world's biggest exporter of cocoa, does not have a factory that value adds cocoa and turns cocoa into chocolate. So Ghanaians eat chocolate made in Switzerland by cocoa farmed in Ghana 60 years after independence, 50 years after independence. So 5 decades you've gone. So craft competence, I want some of you to read, all of you to read the foreword by Dr. Mandaza in Edgar Tekere's biography. Edgar Tuboy Tekere is a biography, and Dr. Mandaza writes a lengthy biography, and it says, he unpacks, and this is similar to Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, his chapter 4, The Pitfalls of National Consciousness. And Dr. Mandaza says, but what could we expect from those that took over the state in 1980? I don't want to really mention what he says for fear of being accused of disrespecting teachers or peasant farmers, or I'm not going to enter into that debate. But there's no statecraft. And it explains the evolution of this document, of these, of these organizations. The SADC charter is a poorly drafted charter, and there is no excuse for its poorly drafted one, because at that time in 1992, whoever was drafting, whether it's lawyers or whatever experts, there were so many other regional precedents to follow. The Organization of Inter-American States and so forth. So there's no excuse at all, which is why you are right, Baba, to say, but these people are fun, because they're fun. They're fun. I have attended those SADC summits, by the way. The officials go there a week before. The officials are going there for per diems to go and play in the nightclubs. Then 2 days before the actual summit, the ministers come in and receive documents that the officials would have worked on. Then the heads of state come in for the official opening, and then for a 2-hour meeting where they're just endorsing. There's no critical thought, except the one period where Mbeki was the president of South Africa. He was different from the other. He was thorough. He was a technocrat. So you'd read those resolutions. His people would change the wording. His people would, he was different. I don't agree with him on a lot of issues, but I must give credit where it is due. Others would be sleeping. I went in 2009. I don't know whether I should mention this, but perhaps I should. So I shan't mention the country. I was Minister of Finance, so I was invited to address SADC heads of state because Zimbabwe was asking for money, March 29, 2009. Some of you can Google the country, but I shan't mention the country. So we go to this summit and I make my presentation and so forth. But in the afternoon session, heads of state were not there. And then we discovered that in this particular country, most heads of state never took their wives. And then we discovered that in this particular country, most heads of state were entertained. They were being entertained by ungodly things. So there's no time for statesmanship. There's no time for statecraft. I see some of you are laughing. It's a country somewhere in Southern Africa. 29 March 2009. So if you Google where SADC was on the 29th of March 2009, you will know the country, and you will not be surprised by what the heads of state were given. The difference between SADC and ECOWAS, I think it's stretching it too far to say the differences between Nyerere and Kwame Nkrumah. But I think what is very insightful is to follow the debates which took place in Ghana when they were forming the African Union, the debate about whether we should form an African state and so forth. I think those debates require a PhD thesis because they explain a lot of things. They explain a lot of things. It is also true that Kwame Nkrumah was a great internationalist, but a very poor president, which is why when he was removed by a coup in 1966, Ghanaians went in the streets to celebrate. But if you look at President Mwalimu Nyerere, I urge you to read there's a biography of him that has just come out, which is in 3 volumes, 3 different authors. One of the authors is my old lecturer, Professor Isha Shivji from the University of Dar es Salaam. Brilliant work by Tanzanian scholars. I urge people to read that. And when you read that, what will strike you up is how President Nyerere cared for his people, his ideology of Ujamaa, how he cared for his people. And it's a pity that Tanzania was caught in the Cold War conflict, East versus West, and so forth. But let's credit him for creating a society that is very inclusive, that is very tolerant, because Tanzania mirrors the character of President Nyerere. And he was a teacher, he was a mwalimu. So the great attribute of great teachers, they listen. Great teachers listen. People think great teachers talk a lot, but great teachers listen. Great teachers listen. And that was his great attribute, and it comes out in this. I think that there are 3 things which I think why ECOWAS is different from Zimbabwe, from the SADC region. The first one, I think, is the high number of military coups that have occurred in that region more than Southern Africa. And the acceptance and the realization that you need quick solutions to the problems of peace and stability. And the quick solution is a military solution. The quick solution is a military solution. So if you, those of you who know President Obasanjo was a general. President Obasanjo carried out a coup. You know that. President Rawlings was a soldier. Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings, he carried out a coup. He understood the coup. He was part of a very active ECOWAS that brought down Charles Taylor. So I think that mindset should not be discounted. That mindset should not be discounted. The second thing that is also very clear in West Africa is how integrated these tribes are. And if you want to see the falsity of the Berlin Conference of 1884, go to West Africa. In fact, start with East Africa. In East Africa, everyone speaks Swahili. So when you go to the West now, the Malians, the Malians, the Senegalese, they speak one language. Those of you who listen to Salif Keita and others, Baba Mao, they speak one language. They sing one language. I think that too is a lot of, if you go to Cameroon, if you go to Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, they're one people. Burkina Faso, they're one people. They're one people. And they're very integrated. So a person who is born in Mali, but he lives and works in Cote d'Ivoire, born in Cote d'Ivoire, lives and works in, you'll be shocked by the integration of the people. A person born in Togo, at the Bio, for instance, you find the Senem at the Bio, the Senem Traore, cutting across the length and breadth of West Africa. It doesn't matter whether it's English-speaking West Africa. It doesn't matter whether it's French-speaking West Africa. So I think that also is an influence that they feel so integrated that they'll act quickly. But I don't know the factors. The fact of the matter is that there's been a different response between SADC and ECOWAS. Then Chief Charumbira, we can only congratulate him on his election, and hope that he will serve the continent and not the interest, the parochial interest for political party. He's been elected as the president of PAP, not the president of Zimbabwe in the Pan-African Parliament. And I hope he will understand that. He will understand that he has been elected to save Africans, not to save the interests of ZANU-PF in the Pan-African Parliament, or to save the interests of Zimbabwe in the Pan-African Parliament. He has just been elected to save Africans, and I wish him luck. He's someone I've known for a long time, and at one stage I was privileged to be his lawyer, so I wish him luck.
Thank you very much, Honorable BITI, for quite detailed presentation. I once again salute everyone. It's very important to have someone who's got the experience of working in a government, but also with the intellectual rigor to be able to understand these institutions. Very quite thought-provoking submissions, Honorable Vice President. We thank you and we salute you. We continue with the discourse. I would also ask if there are any further questions. If you have got a question, you can go ahead. If you can quickly introduce yourself and then also put a question so that we're able to interrogate this very important topic. I see my brother Kudzai, who actually rushed, thanks to the internet, to try and find out of everything that the Honorable Advocate talked about. You talked about the forward from Dr. Mandaza, but he could not share with us the title of the book, but he went to check what happened in Swaziland, where head of states did what the Americans talk about, that every American has a right to pursue happiness. So head of states
you got me. I wasn't going to mention the country. So
thank you very much, Honorable. Of course, we all have had the famous Swaziland culture and this ability to assist compatriots in pursuit of happiness. So I'll give Kudzai to ask a question, and then after that, my brother Dr. Msonza can also come with their questions or interventions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Moderator Ostalos. Good seeing you after a long time, and I can see that you never grow up ever since from our university days. I mean, okay, I just want to bring up my contribution is that we should never underestimate what I would put the dualistic roles of these so-called regional bodies. In my view, we might not need to have SADC, and then we have African Union, and then many other regional bodies that we have in Africa, because of the constantly repeated roles that they might bring to the table. And as you have mentioned, Honorable BITI, that we are limited in terms of resources and capacity. So imagine that there's a contribution that Zimbabwe is supposed to give to SADC, it's supposed to give to African Union, it's supposed to give to COMESA, it's supposed to, I mean, there are so many of these regional bodies. I would attribute the use of ECOWAS to their natural resources that they have. For example, Nigeria has got oil, for example, and I think they've got the chunk of the money that it can maybe give or feed to its success. So if you find that in Africa, our regional bodies, because if I'm to read what Africa is supposed to do and what SADC is supposed to do, there's a repetition of roles thereabout. So why is there need for SADC and AU when we are all African countries? If I'm putting it that way, and then maybe I don't know if you have a reason. Of course, I know that Julius Nyerere then played a very important part in the founding of SADC, but I don't know why Zaire was rejected when it made an attempt to join SADC. Yet we find Tanzania, which is supposed to belong to the East African High Commission, we find it in our own SADC, it's not in Southern Africa. So maybe if I would wanted to make a comment on these 3 questions. Thank you so much, Honorable BITI.
Well,
Thank you. We can have.
Yeah. Thank you. Good to see you, Comrade Rostalos. So I want to disagree with you with your explanation that perhaps the reason why ECOWAS intervenes is because of resources. You say Nigeria has got oil, but Angola also has oil. And remember, the strongest economy in Africa is actually South Africa. So the South African economy is bigger than the Nigerian economy. I know my Nigerian friends would argue that to rebase their economy, and they created a GDP which was bigger than that of South Africa. I think they rigged the figures. I'm joking. The fact of the matter is that South Africa is the biggest economy in sub-Saharan Africa. So it can't be a question of resources. It can't be a question of resources because Angola has oil, Nigeria has got oil. South Africa is the biggest economy. Nigeria is also a big, a big economy. So I think it's more to do with leadership. I think it's more to do with the historical evolution of the West African states compared to the evolution of the Southern African states, and also the nature of the colonialism. The French colonialism is very different from British colonialism. The assimilado, So I think those factors are probably closer to the truth than just the resources. You ask, what is the need of these bodies? I think we need them, but I think there should be a different focus. The SADC leaders were not wrong in 1992 to move away, to graduate from the decolonization polity to one of economic independence, underpinned by integration, underpinned by regional integration. They knew that Africa and the SADC states in their little economies stood no chance. If you take Zimbabwe, we hardly have any middle class. Our effective market is less than 2 million people. But if there were to be a SADC union, and if there were to be SADC integration, Zimbabwe would suddenly have a market of 300. South Africa would suddenly have a market of 300 million people. So that's a huge market. That's a huge, huge market. Africa has got the same population as China. We're over 1 billion people. But the Chinese economy is now the second largest in the world because China, like Africa, so like India, has been able to take advantage of its population. And when we went to school many years ago, we were told that huge populations are a disadvantage. And Matthias was lectured on us. But now modern economists now know that population is an advantage because a huge population is a market. When you have 30 million people, they have to eat. I remember speaking to Papa Obasanjo one day. Some of you might not know this, but Papa Obasanjo is a big chicken farmer. He's an egg farmer. He's a big chicken farmer. So he said to me some time ago that, you know, Tendai, I decided to open a chicken farm. And I said to him, why? Then he said, I realized that there are so many of us Nigerians. There are over 200 million Nigerians. So he says, I realized that if I can sell one egg a day for just 1 cent, I could be a millionaire. So he decided to open a chicken farm to do eggs because of the Nigerian population. So we now know that populations are an advantage. But thanks to the Berlin Conference of 1884, we are scattered little countries. Many of whom are caught up in, I call them states in permanent crisis. Take the DRC. I don't know why they call it democratic. I don't know why they call it Republican. It's none of the above. Take the Central African Republic. Yes, it's central, but it's not a republic. It's a tin pot country. It's a failed country. And we are creating them. We are creating states. South Sudan. Why did we create South Sudan? I mean, tell me. It's nationalism gone ori. Frantz Fanon is turning in his grave. So we need regional integration. And that's why I support the idea of the African free trade area and the protocol that was signed last year in March in the establishment of the ASFTU in Ghana, because we need regional integration so that we can take advantage of the economies of scale of our population, and the population which is going to increase. By 2045, most African countries would have doubled their populations. Most of you are Zimbabweans here. Do you know that by 2045, the population of Harare alone will be 10 million. The population of the entirety of Zimbabwe will be around 45 million. But we are not creating sufficient jobs to catch up with that. So there'll be war. War is coming. But if we have new leadership, they will be able to build an economy. In 2018, we were talking about $1 billion economy in 5 years, because only that can absorb the population that is coming. So I support these bodies, but they must have focus on, number one, the economic liberation of our people. Let's grow economies that are inclusive, that carry everyone on board, that create employment, because employment is the link between development and growth. So employment is important. Employment is important. So that's number one. Number two, let's speak one language. The world has become flat. What do I mean by speaking one language? We must have the same values. What are those same values? The values of the citizen, the values of constitutionalism, the values of the rule of law, the values of accountability, the values of legality, the values of an ethical leadership, the values of an accountable leadership, the values founded on agreement, founded on a social contract. You find this language missing in the SADC Charter. The African Union, at least there's some mitigation because of the existence of the African peoples and human rights. So they talk about some of these rights. At least there's mitigation. SADC does not have a human rights instrument. The African Union is a human rights instrument. So we need to speak the same language. We need to speak the same language. What is that language? It is the language of democracy. It is the language of accountability. It is the language of the rule of law. It is the language of an ethical leadership, an ethical state, what Paul Collier writes in the future of, of capitalism, what Stiglitz has written about, and so forth. We need that. We need to speak the same language. We need to speak the same language. Number three, so of economy, human rights, Number 3, we are already flattened by technology. So you are in Manitoba, in Canada somewhere, I'm here in Dotito, but I can see your ugly faces. You can see my ugly fat nose because of technology. You see what I'm thinking every day. You see what Ostalos is thinking every day because we're tweeting. So we need to embrace technology because technology is forcing us to be one. Technology is forcing us to be flat. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Dotito. It doesn't matter whether you're in Mukumbura, where I was last week on Friday. The 4th revolution is making us equal. It's equalizing us. Battles of yesteryear were fought with grenades. They were fought with tanks. They were fought with the supersonic jets. Battles of today are fought by Wi-Fi and technology. And the mobile phone I'm holding in my hand has become a weapon of mass destruction. The funeral of Dr. Alex Magaisa proves one thing. The pen and technology is mightier than the seaweed. The BSR is bigger than a tank. Those are the battles of the future. And these are the things that our leaders need to be focusing on. And in future, it's already with us. We are now using one currency. I'm not talking about US dollars. I'm talking about blockchain currency that is called cryptocurrency. 10 years from now, we will all be using from that. Mark my words. Mark this conversation. 10 years from now, we will all be using cryptocurrency. That's the future. That's the present. These are the things that the old women, the gerontocrats in SADC, in ECOWAS, in the African Union should be talking about. And when you address inclusivity, when you address a functional economy, when you address democracy and inclusion, when you address the issue of social contracts, when you address the issues of full employment, of beneficiation, when you alter the accumulation model, what is the point of war? There's no point of war because wars are about exclusion. Wars are about being left out. Wars are about the actualization of grievances. There's no war without a grievance. And all wars are caused by a light, a spark, a light that sparks the fire. And what sparks the fire is a grievance. Go to the First World War, go to the Second World War, there is a grievance. Our own war of liberation was about grievances of exclusion. So eliminate the causa of war, eliminate grievances. How do you eliminate grievances? Have a growing economy that carries everyone on board. Have functional democracy that delivers. Have the rule of law, have strong institutions, strong parliaments, strong judiciary, strong civic society. Technology has made us flat and equal already. Technology is making us, just like jet and taxis, technology is making us equal. Because even if you have a goat of a phone, you still have WhatsApp. So the regional bodies are important because they can then have different specialities. So turn the African Union into the OAU as we know it, into a political body for peace, for engagement with China, for engagement with India, for engagement with the BRICS, for engagement with the European Union, for engagement with America. But once you have economic integration, we remove borders, we remove passports, we remove trade barriers, we remove invisible barriers to trade. This continent will be free. Not the current mess, the current craziness. It's more expensive to go For me in Zimbabwe, it's more expensive to go to Nigeria than to go to London. And if I want to go to Tunisia or to Senegal, I have to go through to Europe first. I have to go to Charles de Gaulle International Airport to first. What kind of nonsense is that? But it is happening 5 decades after independence. So Kwame Nkrumah is standing in his grave. So I submit we need them, but let's have different focus. Let's have different specialties. I thank you.
Thank you very much, the advocate, Honorable Vice President. Quite compelling submissions, especially on the future of SADC. I think it's clear because anyone would have wanted to know what is the future of SADC, what needs to be done. And I think that it's now very clear in terms of the possible key focus areas, particularly around what I think is the new social contract, but not only in states, but in the African continent. So we need to define the new social contract based on agreed values, principles, and so forth. So quite interesting around integration. I think Dr. Musotsa is burning with questions. So I'll allow him to come in, and then we can also get your response, Honorable Vice President. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Comrade Ostalos. And I would like also to thank my learned friend, Advocate BITI. You are such an articulate lawyer who is able to articulate the challenges in perspective and tap into the resources of the international community within which we live and put them across to us in such a wonderful way. I really appreciate that. I am one of the admirers of human rights, and I want to talk to that, especially when you raise issues about the challenges we have in Africa, and especially within our region, southern region, and considering SADC and AU, and some of the colleagues have asked about the relevance of those, and I agree with you that indeed we need those organs. However, as they are today, I agree with you that like what Professor Lumumba said earlier on, that they are just toothless bulldogs, and he even went further to say he doubts if they are bulldogs at all. So the Lager mentality is very discernible. You can see it that whenever there's a challenge amongst these old guys, the old guard, they don't want to lift a finger. They want to protect each other, even if their friends have done something extremely wrong. We have seen this happen not very far from our own country in Zim, when there were destructions of people's homes, etc., etc. And I know you were part of, the lawyers who were fighting for the human rights and the human rights lawyers of Zimbabwe, etc., etc. Nothing was done. SADC was there, but it did nothing. AU was there, it did nothing. Talk about the Lager mentality. Talk about protecting, the regimes. Talk about my major thing, I think, is with the founding documents. Yes, if you go through them, I've done that. And my biggest issue, which I think is crippling those organizations, is, where you have these wonderful clauses, and then within those clauses is deliberately included exclusionary clauses, which basically takes out a country from a particular clause, which it knows very well that it affects it, and nothing is done. So how are we going then to be able to have cohesive organizations like SADC and AU which are not going to run on the basis of what a particular country likes, and which are going to overlook human rights violations. I like what you said just now about, the fact that indeed we are now in a flat world. It's very true. We are in a flat world. Communication is easy. We are able to meet with people in different parts of the world. That is great. But what we have seen is that these, our guys with the Leaga mentality, they are able to interfere even with that flat world to stifle what you would want to happen in terms of, good interaction, good communication, good sharing of ideas, etc., etc. We have seen this happen in Nigeria when they had the recent elections. Isn't it that internet was stopped for some time? Now, my question, my learned friend, is how are we going to overcome such challenges that those that we want to change, they still have the capacity even to interfere with the flat world in which we are in? Zimbabwe, I mean, they still want television. Which country does that in this day and age? How are we going to surpass that? Because all that you have said is wonderful, and that's the direction we should go. But we know those who are in charge, they will always stop any effort for us to get at par with anybody else. So I will put it to you that way. Maybe your reflections on that.
It's a very important point you make. I think you're making more of a point than a question. These institutions have a loose agreement. I referred to the charter, the SADC charter of 19 August 1992. Very loose, very loose. Now, most of you on this platform are priests, are men of the clock. Any member of your own congregation is accountable to you, is accountable to the church. That's why we pay tithes. And there are certain do's and don'ts that come because of the commitment to our faith. Accountability. The most common contract in the world, which you guys preside over, is the contract of marriage. That contract has reciprocal obligations. And the reciprocal obligations create accountability. So when one fool stands before the pastor, Baba Gusha says, I do, the other one says, I do, there are obligations that are created. The most important one is fidelity, which is also unfortunately the most breached. Another one is support. When I marry you, I undertake to support you. And women, the Bible gave us a case after eating the fruit of Genesis. There is the obligation of conjugal rights. Those are obligations. Now, in that charter, the only single obligation is to pay subscriptions. And even if you don't pay subscriptions, they will not expel you. I became Minister of Finance in 2009. Zimbabwe had last paid its subscriptions in 1997. They were not expelled.
I want to thank everyone who's here and those that would have connected or on this very important session. I'm happy that it was recorded because we might be able to interrogate some of the submissions and conversations. Very interesting discussion, very interesting and thought-provoking submissions by both the advocate, the Honorable Tendai BITI. We thank him. And of course, thank every speaker and the contributions which made the discussion very fruitful. I also couldn't connect in the early parts of the conversation thanks to the internet problems in this part of the country, but I humbly thank everyone for their contribution and for listening. And of course, our host for this very important conversation, which I don't think will end today, but will continue as we interrogate the aspect of peace, the aspect of stability and growth of our own countries, and of course, the continent. Technology has made it easier for us to convene and be able to interrogate critical questions of national and regional significance. I'm very thankful for this session, and hopefully that we are going to continue with these conversations in different platforms, and of course, the host and those who have made it possible. Without much ado, I return back to the main host. But for me, the discussant and of course, the Honorable Advocate Tendai BITI, we thank you and hopefully you have a great night. Thank you.